All right. So remember 2 weeks ago we started by not even looking at the book of Ecclesiastes. We talked just only about Solomon, the very rare and extreme example that he gives us of how he was raised. And we know that he's a man that had wisdom unlike any other. And where did that come from? Okay, it came from God, but could we also say, or did we also say, that it could have come from some other places? And if so, how or why?
Teaching from his dad.
Okay, yeah, we looked a lot at his dad. Who's his dad? Okay, David is his father. We looked at some things that he said, some things that he prayed in regards to Solomon being young and inexperienced and all these things. Really, the only thing we looked at in Ecclesiastes, I believe, in that first week, is that he's a man here in this first chapter that says, I have seen everything under the sun. So it's a little hard to take some of what he's going to say if we don't understand that he is that man that would have seen a lot of stuff through his father, through his mother. And so really Solomon, which, what is his other name? Yeah, don't y'all forget that part. Get it, Maya? If that's the only thing you learn that. No, but really, Solomon is our guy. Like of all the guys that could write a book like this and teach us how to be happy in our lives under the sun, this is it. So as far as the intro, really, we looked at some key themes. Number one is that this theme is going to continue to pop up. It's going to be phrased in various ways under the sun, under heaven, upon the earth. And super interesting, at least to me, which I brought up last week, is that this is really an outlier of a book in your Bible. Because oftentimes we want to really look at, or really most books address where is our happiness? Where is our ultimate fulfillment of joy and happiness? That was a question. Okay, when we get to heaven in this long line that is eternity. And yet this is a book that really is going to address these few vapor-like years that we have, like this one little blip. So it's interesting in that really what we're looking at is not necessarily even eternity or ultimate joy and happiness, but Solomon teaching us through the inspiration of the Spirit how to be happy here in our lives under the sun. But ultimately, there's another part of this. Like, it's not just, I'm gonna I'm going to suggest to you like these first three chapters are kind of like depressing in a way, maybe might be the best word to use right there. But it's also important because there's another phrase that pops up time and time and time again that we talked about last week that is not what you see up here. So what is that other phrase that pops up? Starts with a B. Okay, so y'all know, you just don't want to say it. You're waiting on someone else. Vanity of vanities. All around is vanity, or it's meaningless. And so we talked about how that plays like a major role in our lives under the sun. And why is that the case? Why is it important in order to be happy right here that we understand what things are meaningless or what things are vanity? Why is that important?
Last week we talked about, uh, I need to know where not to find happiness
Yeah.
in all of these things, wisdom, pleasure, riches, and power, and to make us want heaven more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I need to know where the dead ends are, if you will, right, Miss Linnell?
And how I handle the dot or the
Yes.
vapor or the dash
Mm-hmm.
affects my eternity.
It does, yes, but not in such a way. Remember, we looked at some of those philosophies when it comes to life under the sun, and I proposed to you that Stoic philosophy, which is anything that brings you happiness here on this earth, do not engage. Right? The goal is the more unhappy for them, the more unhappy you are here, the more happy you will be in eternity. And we talked about how God does not want it to be that way. We are here to enjoy and to be happy now. So, what we really looked at, these are the major vanities. There's going to be a lot more that continue to pop up. I think it's like 10 other ones that we would call maybe minor vanities. But here's really the point of these is vanity of all things on earth. Now, if you just say that all things are vanity, how happy does that make you? It does not. But here's the point, and what Solomon is trying to say. Anything that you grab hold of in life and you say, this is my purpose for living, and this is what I'm after, and this is the ultimate goal, and it is not God, then what? It is going to be vanity. It's going to end up in vanity. We'll talk some more about that as we get into the end of chapter 1. And then just this design has a definite purpose. God made it in such a way that anything I try to grab hold of is going to end up a bad thing. Why? Ultimately, to point right back to Him, right? So with that, we made mention before we started that really here are the lessons that we're going to continue to learn as we read that life without God has no meaning. I failed to do this last week. I know this goes against all the rules of reading, but spoiler alert, when you turn to the last two verses, this is the conclusion of everything that Solomon looks at. Is that the end of the matter is this: all has been heard. Fear God, or excuse me, after all has been heard, fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. So what does that mean? But exactly what we're after here on this point. That's what all things are going to point to. Now, those of us that may not have been around for a long time, or been Christians for a long time, um, if you were to just go to the end of this book and read that the end of the matter is this: fear God and keep his commandments. Does that sound like something happy? That sound like something that's super fun? I mean, try to put yourself back to when you were a new Christian. How does that feel to hear Solomon say, here, this is the point of your life under the sun. Fear God and keep his commandments. Sharon, you're shaking your head no?
No, it sounds scary and depressing.
Okay, it sounds scary, sounds a little depressing, but I think those of us that have been Christians for a long time, we're mature enough to know that that is actually a good thing. Like it is a good thing in our lives under the sun to do what God wants us to do. So we're gonna learn that in a book that deals with life on this earth. And then this last part, let me go back. Life can either be a hopeless end or an endless hope. And I think you can kind of gauge that just by looking at people, right? There are people that chase after things, and ultimately it's a hopeless end, right? All right, so let's jump back into chapter 1, and remember that, like, I have no intention of standing up here, being the only one that speaks, giving you all these points, and then we leave, okay? So, as best we can, we're going to try to tackle this in such a way that I'll maybe ask some questions, but you bring in what it is that you've read. A lot of what we're going to do in here is, in some cases, verse by verse. Some cases, there's like a train of thought over the course of a few verses, and we'll stop there. But if you want the free-flowing read, you do that at home, okay? Like just to go through read. So here we go. Verse 1, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes, a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Now, I stopped you here last week. Is that the truth? That the earth will remain forever? No, it's not. So we've got to understand that as we read this, there are going to be some things that are said, and we've got to keep in mind we're looking at it through the lens of life on the earth, not like the grand scheme of things ultimately. Okay. All right. Verse 5: the sun rises, The sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. Verse 7, all streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has already been, it has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. So we stopped right here last week. We kind of made some points. I don't want to rehash it all, but are there other things that you wanted to add? Really, we talked about like the frailty of life. I think Miss Mickey, you made a few points there on life under the sun. Any others, Miss Sharon?
I think with, in talking with my husband, who's not a believer, and he, talked about how the things are going in the world, and there's never been, through the years that we've been together, he'll say sometimes there's never been such a terrible time, or that people are this or that. And I said, now he says next month will be 40 years for us, and so he's got used to my answers on this. I said, well, the Bible says, and he said, I know there's nothing new under the sun, because it said, look at Sodom and Gomorrah, look at the Roman times.
Yeah.
I mean, look at these were all human nature, and it just goes, wind goes round and, goes from the south to the north. It goes round and round. It just keeps going.
And
so
yet
don't get all depressed, because this has got to be the worst time to bring kids up, or this has got to be, or
Yeah.
whatever. And he's like, yeah.
Well, that's what I was about to say. We say a lot, man, kids these days, right? Well, yeah, kids those days too, right?
Yeah.
That which was is what will always be. It just a generation comes, a generation goes. Like that's I don't know, maybe a little sad and depressing to some, but when you understand that, yeah, when you understand that, yeah. Anything else on the first 11 verses? Okay, here we go. Verse 12, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. Everybody happy still? You good? Yeah. But part of what we need to know, like, again, this is part of the reason why I think going back and looking at who Solomon is super important. This is not a man that's just going out and doing whatever he wants, as we're about to see. This is a man that his intention in doing this, or part of the reason why he's doing this, is to do it with wisdom, right? He's doing it with some thought in most cases, until we get to this madness and folly piece. All right, look at verse 14. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after the wind. That's another phrase that will continue to pop up. So you tell me, what does that mean? Striving after the wind.
Futile activity.
It's what?
It's a futile activity.
Futile activity, Hillary.
Pointless.
Okay, it's pointless, right? So, like, what an amazing visual. Like, if I brought in, I don't know how many people are in here, but if I brought in enough mason jars with a lid, and I gave it to you, and I said, we're going to do an activity. We're going to go outside, and when the wind blows, I want you to catch some wind. Okay? But you bottle it up in a jar, and right when you walk back in with that wind, what do you really have? You got a whole bunch of nothing. You just got some air in there, right? So you really haven't caught anything. I was doing some reading on this as it relates and ties into psychology. And so there's a lot of psychologists with the many patients they have that say a lot of what they address is this very thing, in that a lot of what they see in people is that they strive after a thing. They make it like everything that they're about to reach this goal or to grab hold of this thing or to make this big purchase or to do this, that, or the other. And once they achieve that thing, what would the world expect them to feel out of that? Contentment, satisfaction, and a lot of joy. But guess what?
No.
That's not really the case. Okay, maybe you've experienced that before. So a lot of what they call it is post-achievement depression or the arrival fallacy, in that I've reached this point. I've strived so hard after this thing and I finally obtained it, but now it is as though I walked outside, caught wind in a jar, and now I got nothing. And so you might want to write two names down if you want to do some Googling today. Michael Phelps. Anybody know who that is? Okay. Unbelievable Olympian. I don't even know how many gold medals he won, right? But he is on record talking about how depressed and how empty he was after achieving what he worked so hard for 4 years and then another 4 years. The other name, Tom Brady. You know who that is? Okay, 27-year-old Tom Brady goes on 60 Minutes and is interviewed. At this point in his life, he's won 3 Super Bowls, has a supermodel for a wife, has the world, and yet he's on the record saying, I don't know what else there is. What else is there? Like this didn't satisfy me. There's still more out there for me to get and to grab hold of. So this is a really big verse here. This striving after the wind. Again, it'll continue to pop up. Any comments there? Anything you want to add? Okay, verse 15. Another big one. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. So what's the point here? Well, God says the idea here is that you're going to live here. And some things that you look at, sometimes it's going to look a little crooked. It's going to look a little messed up. But guess who's not going to fix it? It's not going to be me. I might try. I might make it my purpose and my aim and my goal to straighten out something that God made crooked in my eyes, but that's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. Verse 16, I said in my heart, I've acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. And my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge, and I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and to know folly. Now, I think we know what wisdom is. What is madness and what is folly? What would you say that is in maybe our language or way of saying things? What is madness? Go ahead, Dad.
No, I was going to say folly is silliness.
Okay.
Just wasting your time with trivial junk.
Okay, so folly would be the idea that I'm wasting my time on things that have no end, and yet all the while I know better. Okay, so that's folly. Like, you've heard the word fool in the Bible before? Yes? Okay, so the idea of a fool or folly is that I know what I should do, but I do the complete opposite. Now, madness is different. So what is madness? I mean, when we say someone's going mad, what are we saying about that person?
You don't have the awareness to recognize that what they're doing is folly.
Okay. Yeah, so they're out of control. They don't really realize, although they might know what they should do, they are in the mindset or in the mind frame where they're just gone. They've gone mad, we call it, right? And so, like, I don't know, maybe you've lived that way a time or two, or you can point to times where that was the case. But if not, maybe you've wondered, man, I wonder what it would be like to live a life of madness or a folly. And Solomon did it.
I think there's few that could not say, that wouldn't be able to say that. I mean, I can look at some and think, okay, maybe I don't know their life, but they look like they've always been good. Like maybe but I know that there's probably a bunch of us that can say, let me just bring in the film of just this year to that year, and
Yeah.
it's hard to describe it. Here's madness and folly in my life. Here's madness and folly in my life.
I think we all got some film,
Yeah.
some on tape. We could, hey, and if y'all want to bring it in next week, we can
No,
go.
no, 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 no.
Okay, all right. Go ahead, Dad, and then
I was
Mickey.
just gonna say, a teenager's life is sometimes that.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't mean it, I mean, all of us have lived there. I mean,
Yeah.
if we're a teenager, but, we think our parents are, you know, and we chase junk that just is junk.
Yeah.
You know?
So is that really what's gonna happen, is I'm raising two teenagers?
I was just trying to help you out a little
Yeah.
bit.
There's nothing happy about that.
No,
Yeah.
well, I didn't say it was happening, just said be ready, but all of us have lived through both of those things
Right.
in our own years.
Yeah. Mickey?
Strong's defines that word as insanity,
Yeah.
and there's a fine line between sanity and insanity.
Mhm.
And if you ever have a huge crisis in your life, you kind of see that line sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. Yeah, anybody, anything else here? Like, yeah,
Somewhere in my head, the word commandment, I learned to make it a loving, protective barrier.
Mhm.
So keep God's commandments.
Yeah.
It's His commandments. But if it's a loving, protective barrier, that teenager only sees mom and dad giving them commandments.
Yeah.
Mom and dad understand it's a loving, protective barrier.
Amen.
But we hope we live long enough to be able to understand.
Well, that's a good lead in to the sermon today. We're gonna talk a lot about that, because what we actually find out and what we read or should view his commandments as, John tells us in 1 John, his commandments are not burdensome. They are not meant in such a way to be down your throat or heavy on your shoulders, right? Yeah, very good. So Solomon did this, right? He lived, applied his heart to know wisdom and to know madness and to know folly. And what we find out at the end of this verse is that he perceived, or he realized, that this also is but a striving after the wind. All right, verse 18, for in much wisdom is much vexation, or your version might say much grief, and he who increases in knowledge increases in sorrow, or increases in pain, or in grief. So as we finish chapter 1 here, explain that one. What does that mean? How is it so that in much wisdom or in much knowledge comes pain or comes grief? Mickey?
To him who much is given, much is required.
Okay.
The more wisdom and knowledge you have, the more responsibility you have to use it effectively.
Okay.
And
All right.
not for good, not for evil.
All right.
I think it's pointing also back, which is, I agree with everything you said. I think it also points back to the original problem that mankind had,
Yeah.
the very first sin. So it's like, hey, this is our state. And when we decided that we wanted that power, that knowledge,
Yeah.
this is going to be a problem that we're going to face until, and like you said, the first few chapters of this book, or
Yeah.
if you read them standalone,
Yeah.
it's pretty bleak.
Yeah.
And then the next section, there's bleakness, but it shows how you're going to enjoy without trying to find that knowledge,
Right.
how you can enjoy the day to day.
Yeah.
And then, as you said, you go to the end of the book and it tells you why you're doing that.
Right. Good. Yeah. Anybody else here? Yeah. I just got to thinking, with a 4-year-old in the house, I think he's no, we could even use the teenage girls, Finley and Hadley. Okay. Like, how much more knowledge and experience and wisdom do I have than them? Right? So, like, I mean, isn't it interesting, for as bad as the world is around them, I've got 3 that I know for sure, pretty happy kids. I don't know if Annalee's happy or not a whole lot of emotion there, but you know what I mean? Like, and yet here's me. The more I know, the more I've experienced, the more wisdom I have, the more I know how much pain is out there, how much sorrow and maybe grief. And you guys that maybe have raised kids and they're out of the house, you can maybe point to some of this where maybe your adult kid has done something that you did and it didn't turn out so well. And yet they go ahead and they do it anyways. And what is your reaction to that? is there grief? Is there sorrow? Are there some sleepless nights? So there's a lot of pain in knowing, not a lot of pain, a lot of grief, a lot of sorrow over the idea that here I am, I'm a little older, I'm a little more mature, and yet I have more knowledge and I have more wisdom than, I don't know, my kid or my child, right? So yeah, that's not anything Nash knows. But I think his point here at the end is forget all the stuff for just a minute. Forget what you can acquire and what you can get. Even if you think it's acquiring wisdom and knowledge, those things are still empty, right? So any comments here on chapter 1 before we get into 2? Yes, Mickey?
You know, we are God's children.
Mm-hmm.
And in verse 1, it talks about how everything's cyclical
Mm-hmm.
and how we think we're so wise and everything, but God sees us just like children, just like you just explained.
Yeah.
That's the way God looks at us.
Right.
You know, it's like I saw a meme on Facebook this week where there was just a gate and all the sheep were in front of the gate,
Yeah.
like trying to get through the gate, and they couldn't get through the gate. And it said that's the way God sees us.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, I mean, yes. Yeah, most especially, as you apply that to our kids. Oh, and us. Yeah, go ahead, Sharon.
Is my last one today.
No, hey, there's no limit in here, Sharon. I don't know what classes you've been in, but you speak up as much as you
No,
want.
I.
Hold on, though. If you've spoken up 3 times, just raise your other hand.
Yeah, so I'm
Okay?
I'm
Then it
sure
doesn't count.
I see what it looks like when you talk too much. Okay, so. You don't want to live like ignorance is bliss, but but I know my dad would say, when I was 18, he said to me, I remember in the hallway, and I was just defiant about something and wasn't doing it the way he was saying, he said, you always gotta do it the hard way, and I
Yeah.
see the grief that brought him, and
Yeah.
I think, oh my word, God has given us the book of wisdom, the book of life, the manual,
Yeah.
and he's looking down like Mickey said, he said, oh, the grief that he feels when we just.
When we do it, yeah.
Ugh.
Good, good.
Okay, that's it.
Anybody else on chapter 1? Here we go. Chapter 2. Solomon said in his heart, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity." This is one of the most out of this world statements in this book, in my mind. Because I don't know if you remember, but in maybe it was last week, I told you that most people would say that they're unhappy. But then if you ask the follow-up question, okay, what would fix that unhappiness? What would they probably say? Okay, it's either money or it's this, right? The idea of pleasure. I mean, would it solve all of the problems that you have if I had just a blank check ready to give to you? Would that solve all of your problems to be able to go out and live it up and please yourself with whatever you want, whatever you see, whatever you can grab hold of? Would that make you happy? Okay, we might shake our heads no, but most people would answer yes, absolutely. That would solve it all. Now, we have a tendency, though, to dabble into that side of things, don't we? And being the people that we are, we have a tendency to fall in that direction. But what does Solomon say here? Like, if you're going to understand life under the sun, you have to understand that the idea and the concept of that is that too is empty. That too is meaningless. So look at verse 2. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? And so what does he mean, though, when he says laughter? Is he talking about anything that'll make you happy? I think he's connecting it back to pleasure. Like, I enjoy a thing and I laugh it up and, have a good time with it, right? Verse 3, I search with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days, these vapor-like years of their life. And so what we're about to see here is all the ways that Solomon did that. You're going to see a whole bunch of I did this and I did that and I did all these things. But then you have in verses 2 and 3 that we just read, the conclusion before he tells you what he already did. So what does he say he found? He found nothing, right? And so I think here's maybe the best example that I can give. If I today went on a 1 year hiatus and you guys didn't see me for a year, and I told you that I came back and I've been on a cruise and just living it up and they fed me good, and I mean, I'm on this big, magnificent boat, but I come back and I just say, man, that was terrible. That was absolutely awful. What would you say about me? Jed, you did something wrong, right? You didn't have to work for a year. You lived it up. You were fed all these things, and you just lived it up for a year. I'm the one that did something wrong. And I think that right here we can say that about Solomon, or maybe that's what we want to say. Evidently, Solomon, you didn't go about this the right way, but we need to remember what? That he did. He went about it the way, the only way. He did it with wisdom. He says there in verse 3, I explored with my mind how to find some pleasure in wine. And that's where he starts here. So, like, we know on one hand there's no fun in getting drunk and drinking too much wine and, waking up with a headache and, puking over the toilet, right? But Solomon says, hey, maybe I can find like the perfect dose, like the most perfect amount that will bring some happy and bring some fulfillment to my life. And so that's what I'm going to find. And he concludes that you can't. You can't. So it's the same with folly and with madness. So here's some other things that he did. Verse 4, I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. Verse 8, I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines. We talked about that. The delight of the sons of man. So I became great, and I surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also, my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil. So, not one thing I saw, not one thing I did for myself. As grand and as awesome as any of that is, where did it leave me? It's a moot point. It's empty. It's meaningless. And yet, I think about all those things, or all those times, that I want to do this for myself. And I want to go after it this way. And I need to grab hold of that. And look at the end of verse 10. This was my reward for all my toil. The result, I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and a striving after the wind. And there was nothing to be gained under the sun. I think it's the same idea. It's the same concept. Can you even begin to imagine having all the wealth, having all the pleasures of this world, only for that to end up just like walking outside and catching wind in a jar, closing it up to find you got nothing? Any comments there? Anything you want to add? 'Cause I do think there's one more point in here. Go ahead, Richard.
It's interesting that he says he's doing this with wisdom. A lot of people think that Solomon goes out and just goes on a drunken, debauchal rampage, whatever, and it's important for us to remember he's doing this with wisdom. He's not just going out like a lot of people, just, I want to experience it all,
Yeah.
get God and whatever, what I want.
Yeah, which I think is why it's important to what we did week one to understand who this man is and deem him worthy to write, or to uh, maybe see him as credible to be able to even write this. Mr. Jordan?
Verse 13 in chapter 1 sort of says that, it reminds us that he was doing it with great
Yep.
study and wisdom. So in other words, it was sort of like an experiment. It wasn't that he totally lost his mind,
Yeah.
but he pursued these things because he wanted to really understand,
Yes.
once again, that they were one.
Yeah. Thank you.
Piggybacking on what they said, if we go back to 2 Chronicles 1 and we realize the motivation behind it, even when he asked for the wisdom, he was humble because he's like, who can rule this great people of yours?
Yeah.
And then God answered him and said, because you have asked. Like, so his whole point was,
Yeah.
how am I going to rule these people? It wasn't like,
Right.
let's be happy and do whatever we want.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah, that's a
the
good point.
motivation was to try to rule the people the way God wanted.
Yeah. Let me ask you something else just from this last section we read. What is the common theme that you see pop up over and over again?
All right.
What? I. Now, how crazy is that to think that it's almost like programmed or built into our DNA that I not be one that does stuff for me, myself, and I. That ultimately the real satisfaction comes from doing stuff for other people, right? Is that a New Testament concept? Is that something Jesus talked about at all? Right? Don't worry about yourself. Forget yourself. Remove self from the equation, and things will go a whole lot better than what they do, right? So it's interesting. Like it's almost built into us to produce something, if not for our immediate family, for mankind in general, which is a large part of some things that he's going to say later. Look at verse 12. So I turn to consider wisdom and madness and folly, for what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. So this is kind of a cool thought. I mean, for the most part, based on what we've read, would you say that it matters whether you're a fool or whether you're wise? What is the difference in all of those? I think a lot of what Solomon's saying is like they both come with the same thing. But now look at verse 13. Then I saw that there's more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. So will wisdom bring happiness? Will wisdom bring happiness? We've already talked about it. It's one of the vanities, right? Wisdom by itself and on its own as my main purpose for living? Absolutely not. Will folly or foolishness bring me happiness? No, but is one better than the other? Yes, wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. So maybe you have some comments here, but I think a lot of what he's saying is like, again, back to our main learn. Like you set your hope and your desire on this one thing, you're not going to find it. But yes, some of these vanities we're going to look at, it's better than some of the other ones, right? Anything you want to add there? Good. Look at verse 14. The wise person has his eyes in his head, I hope, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceived that the same event happens to all of them. So what does that mean? A wise man's eyes are in his head. Well, duh. But what does it mean?
Awareness.
Okay, there's an awareness about this life under the sun, and yet the fool's eyes are not in his head. He walks around in darkness and he's bumping into stuff all the time, right? He's taking the dead end road. And yet, I know that one fate befalls them all. So when you consider that, he's going to start to get into this idea that, hey, if a fool lives this way and a wise man lives this way, and we're saying wisdom is better than a fool or folly, but they both end up in the same place, then ultimately, what's the difference? Like, Go ahead, Ryan.
I think what we'll continue to see, and this is really the first ray of light that we get in Ecclesiastes, right? Is that regardless of that outcome is waiting on all of us, the wise will allow that outcome to shift their perspective of the life under the sun, so that they make it to the long part of that area where they want to be.
Very good. Yeah, so let's, I've got like, I don't know, 30 seconds left. Let's just read 15, 16, 17. We'll close there. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. So I said to myself, this too is vanity. For verse 16, for of the wise as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and a striving after the wind. So we'll stop right there. We'll talk a little bit about what we read from chapter 2 and then pick up in verse 18. Thank you guys for being here.